Okay, so we are back here. This is Jose Vasquez, and we are on the Principles of Economics course. And this week we're talking about supply and demand. We just did demand. We're talking about the example is the demand for tomatoes. And now we're going to move to supply, the other side of the market, before we put everything together. So when we talk about supply, we're going to start with the determinants of supply. And as we move over the example, the best way for you to think about this is, think about you're a farmer and think about the decisions you make as a farmer trying to bring your tomatoes to the farmer's market. All right? So what are some of the things, if you're a farmer, that will determine how many tomatoes you're going to be willing to sell at the farmer's market? Well, if we go over some of the things that we did with the demand, the first things that will determine how many tomatoes you're willing to sell is the price of the tomatoes. Because generally, the higher the price of the tomatoes, the more revenue you get for your tomatoes, and the more willing you will be to sell tomatoes, right? And the second thing probably will be, well, the cost associated with supplying the tomatoes. And one of those costs could be, let's say, gasoline that you need to put in your car to bring the tomatoes from your farm to the farmer's market, the gasoline that you're going to have to use to power your tractor in the field, maybe the workers are going to use in the field. All of those are the inputs that you will use to supply the tomatoes. So anytime the price of those inputs change, the cost of supplying tomatoes will change, and you're going to have to adjust how many tomatoes you're willing to sell. So the supply will also going to be affected by the price of the inputs you need to supply your product. So the price of the tomatoes, the price of your inputs, and finally, the last thing that affects your supply for tomatoes is the technology that you will use to create your tomatoes. So one easy example of this is a tractor. Probably 100 years ago, farmers probably were not mechanized, and they used manual labor mostly, perhaps some animals like bulls or to actually plow the field. Fast forward 100 years, and now you use tractors, and the technology that you use to produce your good keeps getting better. As the technology gets better, fertilizers, for instance, another example of that, then you're able to obtain more of the field with less. So you're able to produce more by using the same amount of resources. So in a way, it kind of reduces your cost of production. Better technology allows you to reduce the cost of production. And the cost of production goes down, all of a sudden you're able to produce and to sell more tomatoes. So these are the three main things. And if you get in the picture here, the supply side of the market is really the cost side of the market. What you want to do if you're a supplier is to be able to sell the good for a price or for something that is higher than what it costs you to provide it. Because if you do that, then you're going to earn some surplus on top of that. So anything that affects the cost of producing that good, anything that affects the cost of producing the tomatoes or selling the tomatoes, then it's going to affect how many tomatoes you're willing to sell. Because if your costs go up, then you're not going to be able to sell as much because you're not going to be able to cover your costs. So you're going to require a higher price. And if your costs go down of producing the good, in this case tomatoes, then you will probably be willing to sell more because now you actually can cover the costs easier. So you're probably not going to need a higher price. You can probably cover your costs with lower prices that would allow you to actually sell more. So the idea here that I want you to concentrate on as we talk about supply, the same way as we said that demand is kind of like the value side of the market, the supply is the cost side of the market. And anything that affects cost generally is going to affect the supply side of the market. Now we're going to put this in the same kind of more rigorous mathematical framework that we use for demand. And we're going to put the supply in that same framework. And we'll do that next.
Produced by OCE Atlas Digital Media at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.